Jedd Fisch is building Washington his way.
You are Locked On Huskies, your daily podcast on the Washington Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back into another edition of the Locked On Huskies podcast. I'm Roman Tomashoff. That's Lars Hansen. He's site editor with Athlon Sports is Inside the Huskies. I'm the site editor with Huskies Wire. Thank you for making this your first watch or first listen of the day, as we are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Lars, just a reminder to all the everydayers out there, wherever you're getting this, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, make sure you click that subscribe button. We've got so much fun stuff throughout the offseason. We're going to keep you updated with all the breaking news and so much more, interviews, all that sort of stuff. It's all going to be right here. Make sure you hit the subscribe button so you never miss an episode. Follow us on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. We're on there as well. All forms of social media at Locked On Huskies. We got a really fun show coming at you today. We're going to talk about selling Washington to the 2026 class. We're going to talk about UW's place in this modern world of college football with revenue sharing, salary caps, the way, NFL team building stuff is all happening and going on. That's the best way to say it. I don't want to use the term organization like you and I did about 100 times when we were sitting at Jedd Fisch's press conference earlier today. Which brings us to the main point. Lars, Jedd talked about all the new hires. We went in depth on a couple of them on yesterday's show. And I asked him, I said, you say that you want to build Washington your way, in your image. What makes that different? And he gave a really great answer about just some of the differences that he wants to bring into a program. And after hearing that, I was all in on what this could be going forward.
Yeah, in a way, it's like if you're Pat Chung, you sit back and think, okay, Jedd, have your first season at Washington. Your contract was already here because Troy Dan hired you. So let's just kind of see what you can do, right? You want to be an NFL-style coach, an NFL-style program, kind of just lay the foundation. Let's see what you got. And then we'll revisit in the offseason if you want to grow the budget, do things like that. And I think Jedd put out enough this past season where you can say, you know what? If we could be better in a couple areas here, special teams. Hire 2 new special teams coaches, 1 assistant/quality control coach, and a full-time special teams coordinator who's not out on the road recruiting. So literally, strictly, solely focused to recruiting. Special teams. And so when you look at it from that perspective, it's great. Jordan Paopao now can kind of be more involved in recruiting and doesn't have to worry about, he's going to be contributing to special teams. But the point is, all the investments that we talked about on yesterday's show and in previous shows where this is why Jedd came to Washington. It was to build this entire operation, organization, team, whatever you want to call it at this point, and of course, I think with Jedd's vast experience in the NFL, it'd be kind of weird if he just said, yeah, this is our college football team. It's like, no, it's an organization. Like, I'm used to an NFL structure. I'm interviewing, doing these things and preparing for a game. Now I just have to recruit as well. And so in order to help me be the best version of me and my assistants be the best version of them, they need other assistants. They need guys that can empower their players if, they need to step in and lead a meeting like Michael Switzer did. And now when Brendan leaves, takes over, no big deal. It's an easy bump up. And I think it's the sign of a healthy program where we look every single offseason and, hey, so-and-so is taking a job with this team. So-and-so is taking a job with that team. The new Jaguars GM was with the Rams for like 6 or 7, 8 years. So even though he looks super young in the face, he's been in the systems. The reason why I use that as an example is you need guys that are just depth. There's like depth in your program on the field and off the field. In order to build it up on the field, you have to have it off the field. And so all the little things, even mentioning, Joyce Harrell, who's the director of on-campus recruiting, sounds like she's going to be doing some community work and just building out the program even more so because she has a lot of connections in the area. So you're talking about engagement with the program. Seahawks, they do the same sort of thing where you got the fan, all these sorts of engagement things, and it's about making Washington a destination. That's why Jedd Fisch came to UW.
Yeah, absolutely. That's one of the biggest things that you and I talked about in terms of the resources, in terms of everything that UW can provide on yesterday's show, because it's something I want to make sure we hit on later when we're talking about selling Washington on the recruiting trail, where it's a big part of that, but it goes so far beyond that. We're one of the guys that Jedd mentioned that's going to be talking to the team at some point. He said shortly, so that's what I put out in my tweet because, that means what it means, whatever that might be, is his college roommate and Philadelphia Eagles and Super Bowl winning general manager, Howie Roseman. And I thought that was really interesting because one of the things he talked about with Howie was he said, as the general manager, he handles the medical staff, the strength and conditioning staff, all the off-field stuff, that all falls under his umbrella. And it was why when he promoted Matt Doherty, as we talked about his de facto general manager role on yesterday's show, to the senior director of player personnel, that's why the title is what it is, so he can focus on the players and focus on roster building and talent evaluation. And he talked about it with, Jalil Wadood and Silas Clapham in terms of high school relations and college recruiting with guys that are going to the transfer portal. And then Marcus Griffin, who you and I have talked about as somebody who's going to be really important on the high school recruiting side of things, and building relationships that he already has up and down the West Coast throughout the country, where all of that is really, really important. And having Jake Crawford under Matt Doherty, having a couple of player personnel guys on that side of things as well, and keeping them very focused on that was one of the things that I think is why I really like what Jedd's new model is, and why, or not new model really, but this extended vision of it, is because you see everyone is just very specialized, which works really well for, as Jedd continues to try to build out his organization and make and turn his role into a CEO role, is just kind of, this is the best way to do it, where you don't have to, dip your hand in everywhere. And it's something you and I talked about when we talked about the hire of Ryan Walters, where he talked about wanting somebody with head coach experience, because then he can just be hands off of the defense. And that was why he brought in Steve Belichick, was because he said, hey, I'm going to leave my hands off. I trust this guy to know how to run this unit, and I can focus on other things. I can focus on my offense. I can focus on this. I can focus on that. He talked about with Jimmy Doherty as well, saying, hey, yeah, that's why we brought in JP Losman, to develop the other guys. So Jimmy, who has a really good relationship with Deshonne, can continue to maximize that, continue to help him out. That's why he talked about Mike Brewster coming in as the assistant offensive line coach. It all works together, and having as many coaches and assistants just under your stead as possible to help with different things here and there really makes a difference in the end.
It does. It's why, Jedd made a great point about going back to special teams and kind of tying into your thing as well, because they also had, was it Greg Froelich, the old Charlotte?
Greg Froelich, yeah.
Special teams coordinator, who also Jedd coached at Michigan. So this is why, like, hiring a coach like Jedd Fisch, and Jedd Fisch specifically, tongue twister, is that coached in Michigan, played in Michigan, has the Michigan ties, and then went to the NFL, and then went back to college. And so now you have three almost layers of relationships, where guys that he knew from Michigan, guys that he knew kind of when he was around in that time. Then you got the Steve Spurrier connection, then you got the NFL connections, which go beyond just Bill Belichick. And then, now you're talking about the Shanahan tree, the Shula tree. It's all these names where it's almost like he's not just saying it, oh, I know this guy, here's a name. Because, we know a certain, former UW head coach that would kind of say, hey, look at the Tampa Bay Huskies. And like, on one hand, Jason Licht happens to be drafting a lot of UW players. The Bucs didn't hire Jimmy Lake during their coaching staff or organization since he left Washington. That's not a shot at Jimmy, but it's just like, look, what's the depth and legitimacy of the relationship, where, yes, you were a former coach there. Jedd seems like those relationships seems to last. And I know, not everybody might not like Jedd, but clearly a lot of people do. Like, his old college roommate was Howie Roseman, and they both, joked where it's like, hey, like, we'll see if we can see each other at the top. And yeah, that's never going to happen. But it's like, look how it turned out. And I think that's why you have those type of relationships. That's why I put out on Twitter, I think about a month ago, after the Eagles won the Super Bowl, I was like, what are the chances one of Nick Sirianni or Howie Roseman speak to UW in like the next, in spring sometime? And that was for that reason, right? I wasn't really expecting Sirianni, but I thought maybe as a head coach, he might come out and be a speaker, and then not going to be the case. But knowing Howie, it's like, hey, I'm an NFL GM. We just won the Super Bowl. You guys are trying to be a part of my organization in the future. Here's what we look for. That's invaluable, because you can bring in a coach for one day, but having that relationship where it's like, look, you're probably not going to be the first time he's going to be around, and then you talk about pro days and things like that, where next year when Jedd has way more guys, going to be his guys going on to the NFL, or at least trying to go on to the NFL. How many NFL GMs that Jedd knows and those NFL connections are even like, oh, wow, so-and-so's here. Oh, so-and-so's here. And it's like, what's the connection? It's Jedd Fisch.
Right. And that's one of the things that's really interesting, where, one quick thing here before we move on, where he announced the coaching clinic, keynote speakers, where it's going to be Mike Shanahan. He's got Sean McVay in there, and Chris Shula as well, where having those kinds of connections, obviously it's a slight step down from having Bill Belichick and John Schneider on campus last year. I mean that with all due respect to Sean McVay. I love the way his offense works and everything like that. But it just really proves what he's building, and it's showing the fruits of his labor. Now it's time to prove it on the field. And Lars, it's going to lead into a really interesting discussion, because Washington's place in the evolution of college football should be near the top. And we'll get there right after a message from our friends over at Roy. Attention Locked On Huskies fans, the future of college sports is here and it's transparent. Before the Roy app, NIL negotiations often happened under the table and fans didn't have a clear way to directly support the athletes they love. Now with Roy, you get to be a part of the change and support Husky athletes in the most transparent way possible. Roy, the NIL app, allows you to choose the player you want to support, decide how much to contribute, and receive exclusive content from the athletes you back. The best part, if your players transfer, you get your money back. It's a risk-free way to show your support. The Roy app has given fans control. No more uncertainty. Now you can provide transparent, impactful support and help shape the team and the future of college sports with your contributions. Download the Roy app now from the App Store and start backing Washington athletes the way they deserve with transparency, trust, and a real impact. This is the future of college sports. Join it now by downloading Roy and supporting your favorite players. So, Lars, you and I had a conversation a couple of weeks ago about Washington's place in the evolving world of college football. And we wanted to kind of take that up a notch today because we talked about in a 14, 16 team playoff potentially, which seems like it's going to happen. We don't know when. We'll figure that out when they actually announce it. But as Jedd continues to make all these changes and continues to try to upgrade the facilities, where he talked about sports science, he talked about medicine, he talked about recovery, nutrition, all of that sort of thing, or just all those different sorts of things, they all matter. And it's really nice to hear a coach talk about why they matter and why they're so important, which just kind of begs the question, because we've seen the school and Pat Chun as the athletic director, the willingness to invest in these different things for Jedd Fisch and help start different fundraising campaigns. Should Washington be considered a top 3, top 4, top 5 team in the Big Ten every single season?
In the Big Ten, yeah. That's what I was waiting for the caveat. Are you going to say in the nation, or are we going to go bold here? Because this is a bold show after all.
Oh, I was ready to.
Well, because in reality, no, they're not a top 5 team in the country, not yet, but they're building there. I think I asked you before the show today, which is, what's the over/under on, what's the years in terms of over/under that you gave Jedd Fisch to make a semifinal appearance? And you said 5 and took the under. I agree. Now again, is it 2? Is it 3? Is it 4? 4.5? Again, it's like, so, my point is I think it should be 2 or 3, and that's why you go and get an NFL coach and make all these investments. That's what you're building it for. You're not going and trying an up-and-coming coach and trying to go on the cheap, or trying to go the development route, the old school development route. Hey, we got this new offensive coordinator, first-time head coach. We want to let him develop guys. He's good at doing it at, Albion Christian as an offensive coordinator for like 8 years. I'm just using, there's no example like that. I don't even know who the OC at Albion Christian is. It's just a random pull there. But it's one of those things where, like how they got started initially, where, long-time USC assistant, Mike Hopkins in the basketball team, long-time Syracuse assistant. Sometimes those guys don't always work out well. Jedd, I think somebody might say, like, when he was bouncing around all the time, I think Jedd wants to make this his home. It really seems like all the investment that he's personally making kind of, at times where I thought maybe he's like, oh, hey, like this is kind of building a foundation of a structure at Washington. It's like Jedd really is putting his stamp of, this is going to be my foundation at Washington. Yes, Chris Peterson had a great foundation at Washington. Kalen DeBoer did great things at Washington. But I don't think anybody's truly done it like Jedd, where he's trying to combine the development, the old school way through high school, but also selling the NFL side of it. Look, I've been an NFL coach before. I know how it works. I know how to get you there, especially from an offensive standpoint. And I've evolved because I did it in Arizona. I took them, a team that has won, 4 10-win seasons in its program history. I got them to their 5th. And so that says a lot. Now, that's why you come to Washington, because Washington is in that, to answer your question, top 5 in the Big Ten, where Jedd listed it. It was Ohio State, Michigan, Oregon, Penn State. And then think of a 5th off the top of your head, aside from Washington. Maybe Iowa, kind of depending on what you're looking for. But as a brand, as what, everything that Seattle sells and what UW sells in this level, and that's why Jedd is making these investments, and certain other schools in the Big Ten aren't. They're trying to be guaranteed in that top 4, not necessarily 4, 5, 6 kind of vying for.
So I like to put USC in that 5 spot just because based on the longevity and everything that USC has been, they're not that right now. Let me make that very clear. But everything they have been, and I think that's where Washington certainly belongs in the conversation, because in recent years, Washington's been better than USC. Washington's been better than a lot of these teams in the Big Ten. Truly, the one thing they don't have is a national championship. That's what Michigan has. That's what Ohio State has. And that's it, right? Like that's where we are at this point in time. So I look at it and I say that is something that matters, because when we talked about this in terms of the college football playoff, Washington was the only Pac-12 team to make it twice during the 14 playoff years. So I think that's something that's really important to consider in all of this. And it all just leads into what you're saying, because when we like to get on here and talk about what Washington is and what Washington can be in terms of, we also talk about what job it is in the nation. We're ranked at top 12, top 15, whatever you want to say. And it all comes together, because you can take all that and then you take what Jedd is investing in the program and you start to merge those things and you say, okay, it's what we're going to get to later on with recruiting as well, because Washington has always been this spot that can be a destination, that can be everything you make it to be, because we've seen it at the top end. We saw Chris Petersen take it to 3 10+ win seasons and 3 straight New Year's Six Bowls. We saw Kalen DeBoer take it to a national championship. Those are the heights. And Jedd, as he continues to fight harder than we saw a lot of coaches fight for, we know that wasn't Chris Petersen's thing. We know it wasn't really Kalen DeBoer's thing. Not a lot was Jimmy Lake's thing other than developing defensive backs. We know what Washington can be at the top end. And now it's a matter of having somebody who is willing to invest in that and willing to recruit and willing to make it consistent, where you talk about if this really is where Jedd wants to be long term. If it is, if he doesn't want to go take another job or doesn't want to move on to the NFL, he is setting himself up very, very well to make sure that Washington is a consistent power, because of all the investments that are being made off the field. Where, we talked about all of those things just a minute ago, whether it be science, technology, nutrition, all of those things are awesome when it comes back to football, but it's also a matter of finding a way to do it on the field. And it's something that we've seen the start of, but you like to discuss laying a foundation, and that's exactly what it was last year. Now it's a matter of cranking that up in year 2, because everything off the field is coming along exactly the way that you would hope it would. And if you took everything off and you just looked at the program and said, oh, they've invested this much in this much in that, yeah, I would think this is one of the top programs in the country. Now it's just a matter of putting it together on the field as well.
And the thing that kind of breeds optimism there is you feel like the pieces are there on the field. You feel like you have the quarterback, you got the running back, you got the receivers, you got the DBs, you got the linebackers. What am I kind of thinking?
Trenches.
Exactly. And so that's where we need to find out, because that's really where everything, like last season, if you had call it a top half, so let's say top 8 offensive line in the Big Ten compared to what it was, like, do you think that gets you 1 or 2 more wins? Maybe the Wazoo win, maybe a Rutgers win, maybe I don't know. Iowa just seems like they just had UW's number that day, so that one might be what it was. And so but maybe is that learning curve not as steep? Is it maybe 21-14 or 21-10 versus 40-13, where it's like the floodgates open in the second half? Sure. And so I think, but that's why all these investments, whether it's bringing in Corey Rush, like we mentioned on yesterday's show, Jason Camus coming back and having the ties that he had at Arizona, and everything's kind of marrying together. And like you emphasized earlier, why you go and get Ryan Walters to be the head coach of your defense, basically, is what you're doing. Just look, I'm the head coach of the offense and the head coach. I just need somebody else to run the defense, but I'm going to give you every investment that I have offensively in your defense. I think that's something that previous coaches do, like, hey, we have like a couple of defensive GAs and a couple of quality control guys, but we've got like 5 or 6. Like, Caleb, how many guys were in that photo or visual of Ryan Grubb in the press box? And then you look to the defensive side, and I think every coach was on the sideline, and so it was like, right, who's up in the box defensively? Like, what are we doing here? Like, Ryan and like 20 other guys are up there for the offense, and that's at least a good sign to where, imagine like Kalen could get that with just limited guys. Now imagine what Jedd can do, and now again, think about special teams. There's no excuse for the special teams to not get better when you have 2 new coaches. It's like, that is why we're giving you the resources, but then you also got to validate those resources on the field with wins.
So that's the last thing that I think we should mention. I'm really glad you mentioned the special teams, because we didn't get a chance to talk about them yesterday. And it's one of those things where when Jedd talks about, building the team his way, and as UW continues to evolve, there was one thing that he said flat out, because you asked him, he said, bringing in Chris Petrelli to be the special teams coordinator. He said, you don't see NFL teams have a linebackers coach that's also the special teams coordinator, or tight ends coach that's also the special teams coordinator. It makes those guys' jobs easier to focus on recruiting and focus on their position, because working on special teams is time consuming. So having two guys that can do that and can continue to just work on that side of the ball while we can let Jordan continue to do what he does best is vital. And that's really important. And that's something that I'm just personally, when I look at the coaching staff and I look at how the special teams played out last year, I think that's a very smart move on his part. And it's something where he said, yeah, I see this isn't working. Let me find a way to make it work better. And I think that's just probably the best idea possible. And Lars, that's going to be really important when selling Washington to the 2026 class. And we'll get there right after a message from our friends over at Fabric. Life moves fast, especially when you have a family. One day you're watching your kids take their first steps, and before you know it, they're off to college. That's why securing their future is so important. Fabric by Gerber Life makes it simple to get term life insurance that fits your family's needs. With Fabric, you can apply for term life insurance online right from your couch. You could be covered in under 10 minutes, and in many cases, no health exam is required. As a parent, you want to make sure your family is financially protected no matter what happens. Fabric gives you that peace of mind. You can get $1 million in coverage for less than $1 a day, so protecting your loved ones doesn't have to break the bank. Fabric also offers free digital wills and access to investment accounts to help you plan your children's future. Join the thousands of parents who trust Fabric to help protect their families. Apply today in minutes at meetfabric.com/lockdowncollege. That's MEET fabric.com/lockdowncollege. Policies issued by Western Southern Life Assurance Company, not available in certain states. Prices subject to underwriting and health questions. So Lars, we look at the 2026 class. Jedd talked yet again on Wednesday about making sure that he builds his program like a team builds through the draft, where the majority of talent acquisition is going to come through the ranks of high school recruiting. And with everything we just talked about, do you think that UW can take a big step forward on the recruiting trail in 2026?
Yeah, I mean, I'm curious to see how much do all these kind of staff changes, because again, you can still only have 10, and it sounds like Brian Odom is your 10, to be clear.
Yeah.
With that being said, I'm curious to see how much does that help these guys, be more impactful on the recruiting trail. Not necessarily that they weren't last year, but just what does that change you? Because I was looking at, on three again, narratives are what they are here. But Brian Bonner, number 4 running back in the country, UW just made his top 8. If you close on a guy like that to pair with Ansu Sanoe, another 4-star prospect, I know some knocked him down to a 3, but we'll probably back up to a 4, especially by the time senior tape and all that goes around.
Yeah,
2 4-star running backs, and then you talk about the quarterback, and you talk about the receivers, which my God, they got thrown like 3 dozen offers for receivers out, so someone's going to take those offers along with Terrence Sarian, and then you just got to build out. Like, all the pieces seem to be there. Now you just kind of. One thing Washington will not do is force relationships, because relationships take time. So, yes, Michael Switzer has known some of these guys, but there's still a get-to-know-you period when I come back on campus and, hey, now you're the O-line coach versus, hey, I got to know you and watch you around the players, but I didn't see you as the O-line coach. Not that it was a knock on him, but it's like, hey, you weren't the O-line coach. That was Brennan. So I want to see how you work with the players, hands-on, leading a group versus being an assistant. Once you start to have that foundation built in, then you're talking about capitalizing on the season. And that's why I think a successful season paired with this staff, you could have a very good recruiting class. Again, we're talking top 20, but now are you talking 15 through 10 or 10 through 14, or still in that 15, 16, 17, 18, 19 range, which is still good. Like we talked about with the 12-team playoff, you need to really be more again in that 14 and in rather than sitting on the outside, because that's the bubble you're talking about, the playoffs.
So I agree with you. I'm still in that 15 to 19 range. And I think that it comes down to a couple different things where, we talked about Simone Katawanga, ended up going to USC. That was one where I don't think you or I were surprised by that at the end of the day, but it just makes what we talked about in relation to that, getting a flip of somebody like Bot Militalo makes it matter a little bit more, right? Because you want to be able to show that you can do that and sell those resources and sell those relationships. And because I bring up Bot Militalo because we talked about it on that show, that his uncle is Jason Kafusi, Washington's defensive line coach, or that's part of that. It's selling that to Derek Colman-Brusa, obviously, and it's selling it to the top players, not just on the West Coast and in California, but all over the country. But that's still going to start with Brady Smigiel, in my opinion, where Derek Colman-Brusa will be the most important player. But I think if Washington is able to even break through into that top 15, I have questions about that. I don't know if it's going to happen at this point in time. It's going to be because of Brady Smigiel, because I wanted to talk about that in relation to just where Washington is on the recruiting trail with a couple of top running back prospects. We've seen Deshonne Redeaux put him in the top 6. We've seen Brian Bonner put him in the top 8, where I think that they're going to land one of those two guys. Right now, I would say it would probably be Brian Bonner if I were to make a guess on February 26th as we record this. But I say that in relation to Brady because Brady is the guy who's going to tie all this together, because he's that quarterback. And if you can prove, hey, we can go out there and get, borderline top 100 guy in terms of 247's rankings. I know he's a 5-star on Rivals and top 60 overall in the 247 composite. But if you're able to go out there and get that top end elite quarterback and pair him with some other elite talent, all of a sudden that's going to start to snowball, and you're going to really see that impact, that jump that you couldn't see last year because you tried to flip Donovan Olubade, you tried to flip Andrew Marsh, you tried to flip a couple other guys, and it didn't necessarily work. Hey, maybe when people see what kind of guys are in this 26 class, that pitch might be a little bit more effective.
And tying it to, the first couple of segments, you're adding JP Losman. No slight on Jimmy Doherty, but just again, having another coach to where we talk about, as you mentioned, my quote tweet from Tom Pelissero, where it's, if Jimmy Doherty ends up taking off next year for the NFL, JP Losman is right there. Jedd seems like a guy who would, I'm sorry we call him plays, so that ain't changing. So the guy that's just being the coordinator and being the quarterback coach effectively, that's what the OC and quarterback coach does. Who better than a guy that was in the NFL? You can't do much better. Now, some people say, well, hey, there's one thing to be an NFL quarterback. Yeah, but JP Losman played for a number of teams. Played for a number of years, too. So it's not like had a cup of coffee, those sorts of guys. Which, again, still, you play in the NFL, you play in the NFL. I'm not here to say, one doesn't mean as much. But, having that experience, like that all those little things go into selling it where, because who you're recruiting is UCLA, and I'm blanking on which Tennessee I think is in there, right? Or someone who's in that mix. I don't know.
It's South Carolina, Michigan. Yeah, UCLA is the big one. I think he said Auburn was in there as well recently.
Yeah, and you just run through all those, and it's like, Auburn's got I think Deuce Knight, Michigan's got Bryce Underwood. Both those guys I think are either incoming freshmen or redshirt freshmen, and it's like, but Damon's going to be a sophomore, and so now you're talking about, hey, if Damon's a junior or senior. I know somebody asked me on Twitter, well, when Brady comes in, does he sit for 2 or 3 years? I'm like, well, ain't no way in God's green earth that Brady Smigiel sit for 3 years anyway. It doesn't matter who's in front of him. But 1 to 2, sure. But what does sitting mean in this day and age of college football? Jedd showed I'm getting demanded every single game last year, no matter what.
Right.
Even if there was one snap, a couple of snaps, and then towards the end of the season, obviously significantly more. But just Jedd seems to understand that. I think, again, that's another selling point for Brady, where it's, hey, I played Demond. Now, again, a little bit different situation here because Demond was so athletic compared to Will Rogers that, well, yeah, got to play Demond. That's why my prediction at the beginning of the season was, hey, he'll probably play more than 6, or more than 4 for sure. And I was like, yeah, I didn't see 13 necessarily in the way that it came around. But again, Demond is so good. There's no way you're laying the foundation. You're not expecting 8-4 this year. You should. You're happy with a bowl appearance and laying the foundation so you can take that 10-2, 11-2 jump, and then Brady can see that. Look, if I have to sit, Arch Manning has showed, and again, I know Arch is the Manning name and all that is a separate case, but in a way, it's like of all the people that can complain, it could be the Manning family, and yet they're not, because you understand. Look, if you're in an NFL program, what's the worst thing? Sitting behind Kirk Cousins for a couple of games, and then if he ends up struggling, hey, cool, I can start now, and now it's my team. Same sort of process in college where you got an entrenched starter for a year, maybe a year or 2, but you're the next guy, or you have confidence you're the next guy. And then so if you don't get the job, you're probably transfer, and have that conversation in 2026 or 2027. And so be it. I think that's why having that NFL structure is so important, because where would you rather bet the start of your career on? In an NFL program or in a lesser school, but with a chance to start? There's risks and rewards to both, but I think, most people would tell you, what, I'd rather learn from the best, sit, and then if I don't win the job, I'll figure it out after that. And I'd rather try that hand versus, no, I don't want to try that hand long-term. I'd rather go with a guarantee right now. It doesn't always work.
So I love where you're going on that. I just want to make sure we get to 1 or 2 other things before we jump out of here for the day. For me, the one thing I wanted to mention, because everything you're saying about the NFL program, all that, it's all absolutely correct. And I feel like it holds doubly true when you talk about offensive and defensive line recruiting in this class, where we saw them lay a foundation. I know I didn't want to use that term again, but it really is what it was on both lines with a bunch of guys that aren't going to play right away, but are high end. And, on the offensive line, that's fine. But on the defensive line, there's nobody who I think is going to come in and burn their red shirt. And I say that because I think they're all just long-term developmental guys who I like and are very talented at very high ceilings. But on both sides of the line this year, you need to go out and prove that you can get these high caliber quality impact guys who can come in and play right away on day one, because that's what Derek Colman-Brusa could do. That's probably what Anthony Jones could do. That's what a bunch of these other guys that you're trying to set up visits with right now are going to be able to do. And you need to prove that you can sell the school and win those battles. And I think improving on the field is going to help that immensely. But I think the combination of everything we talked about today, whether it be the resources, whether it be the development, whether it be the coaching staff, those are all things that you can sell and can be really, really strong selling points. I want to add that. But now it's on this coaching staff to go out there and actually get the job done and sell these recruits on what Washington has to offer. Lars, as always, thank you so much for being here. Thank you to all of you tuning in. We really do appreciate your support. We got so much more fun stuff coming for you throughout the offseason, so please make sure you subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Whether that's YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, we're there. We're everywhere. We're updating the channel with new content every single day. So make sure you click that like button, click the little bell so you don't miss when we post a new video. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, drop them right down below in the comment section. And if you're audio only, please give us 5-star reviews. It does help us out a lot. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll talk to you on Friday.